So this morning, our message title is called Evolving. Who would think that that idea of evolving could be so exciting, and yet it really is. We're taking a look at the many ways life is evolving, both within and around us, now and forevermore. The past, the present, future. It's all a journey of evolution. And we're looking at history, present day, and knowing that we're creating our tomorrows. We're also looking at what that means for each of us, or us collectively, and us collectively, along with what it could mean for and to each one of us.
Well, most of us would recognize Charles Darwin as the founder of evolution theory. And Bruce Lipton, in his book Spontaneous Evolution, talks a lot about Darwin and his theory, and about how evolution is used by us every day in our lives, and how we can actually use the idea of evolution to create the world which we wish to live in. And if you haven't read Bruce Lipton books, I definitely encourage you to do so. They're fascinating. But even the idea behind evolution theory has evolved since its inception. In the early 1840s, Darwin was developing his theory of evolution, but he was hesitant to share his theory because he feared that if it were true, it would contradict biblical scripture. And he found that that was maybe not the best thing for him to do at the time, because it would question the relationship of God and man and the creation story in the Bible. And we know how early scientific theories cooperated or were challenged by the church, with people like Galileo, Bruno, Kepler, Copernicus, and Descartes, and so on, and eventually Charles Darwin as well. When Charles' friend Alfred Russel Wallace, an English naturalist, shared similar findings with Darwin in a manuscript titled On the Tendency of Varieties to Depart Indefinitely from the Original Type, Darwin realized that if he didn't publish soon, Wallace would be the official founder of evolution theory. Not only did Darwin, a well-known aristocrat, want the prestige of being the first to publish, he didn't want the honor to go to a mere commoner, which Wallace was. So he solicited help from a couple influential scientific scholars. And they brought about what was to become known as the delicate arrangement, or one of the greatest conspiracies in the annals of science. They altered the dates of Darwin's writings and presented Darwin as the prominent developer of the Darwin-Wallace theory of evolution in 1858. The Wallace view of evolution was focused on elimination of the weakest of the species. Darwin's view was focused on the survival of the inherent fitness of the species. They may seem the same, but those are diametrically contrary perspectives of the same basic theory. What most of us don't know is that Darwin, as an aristocratic upper crust member of society, had an ulterior conclusion and motive in his origin of species by means of natural selection. And that was to justify the standing of members of the higher class. You probably don't know that the original title had a subtitle. And the full title was The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or The Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. This wasn't only scientific Darwinism, it was social Darwinism. We could say it kind of evolved into a new idea of Darwinism. In fact, the theory in his book suggests that the possibility of improving humanity by purifying the race by eliminating unfavorable genetic inferiors. Well, in Darwin's later years, seeing where this caused a different turn than his original idea, his attention began to focus more on the evolution of love and human kindness. But by the time most people had already accepted the more relatively demeaning aspects of his theory, it became hard to switch it back. However, today, most of us know only the scientific aspects of his theory. And as you can see, the evolution of the theory of evolution has taken some directions and turns and things we may not have expected. But that's the case of evolution. So now I want to talk about, similarly, the evolution of science of mind. Not exactly similarly, but the evolution of science of man actually began long before Ernest Holmes. But through his study of the world's spiritual traditions and seeking common truths and applying these spiritual principles to philosophy and healing traditions, he devised this spiritual philosophy known as science of mind. And our beginnings focused on ancient thought and practices, but it wasn't long before modern science was proving scientifically what was believed and taught spiritually and philosophically from ancient times. Spiritual efficacy was being validated in several branches of science and fields of medical health. At the time Ernest Holmes established the Church of Religious Science, it was still generally uncommon to follow scientific research in what was previously relegated to spiritual belief. As we know, through evolution, our spiritual organization has changed names and has adopted new emphasis over the years, but our overall philosophically spiritual focus has held to our original principles. Our organization in the early 60s even split in two separate directions, leaning towards two separate leadership models with differences in organizational design. But the underlying spiritual principles of our teaching remained the same. So logically, in 2012, the two sides reunited as Centers for Spiritual Living, and that's where we find ourselves today. Yet we are still evolving and growing. Like a tree, as we grow, we may branch out, but our roots continue to nurture us. Evolution implies remaining who we are, maintaining our identity while moving through variations of who we are. If we change who we are and what we are, that is not evolution. That is transformation, which is not necessarily a bad thing as long as we don't abandon our roots. Remembering how scientific evolution of Darwin transformed into justification for demeaning social agendas, we must remember to maintain and honor our spiritual principles as a paramount priority as we evolve in science of mind. We know that Jesus was not a Christian, Buddha was not a Buddhist, Muhammad was not a Muslim. Yet each of their teachings made great evolutions in the world and turned into beautiful, powerful influences on the world. They also went through a lot of transformations. They created a lot of religious wars. It's important for us to remember that we're at choice to aim the direction of our own personal evolution. Ernest Holmes says, evolution is the awakening of the soul to the recognition of its unity with the whole. Remember that from the beginning to the end, we are all one. He also says, every man is an immortal soul with a pathway to an eternal evolution, destined to be ever more and never less himself, on and on and on. Oh yes, I forgot another part. This isn't exactly having to do with evolution, but it does have to do with the history of science of mind, and it's an opportunity for you to learn more about this. We just received it this week, and it's an invitation to join a tour. It's a tour of New England, and it's going to look into the New Thought movement. It's led by Dr. Peter Wellness, who, by the way, was on my final ministerial panel and decided that I could be a minister. And she's doing it with Reverend Kathy Mastroianno, who is the leader and director of the Science of Mind Archives, and I was on her final ministerial panel. And so it's to support the archives is also to learn more about Science of Mind and their beginnings, and to actually see the fall foliage, because it starts last week in September of 2027. It's going to begin in Bethel, Maine at the childhood home of Ernest Holmes. Then it's going to go to Belfast, Maine, the home of Phineas Parkhurst Quimby, the father of New Thought. Then it's going to go to Lexington and Concord, Massachusetts, to visit the home of Ralph Waldo Emerson and walk around a nearby Walden's Pond so we can get to know something about Thoreau as well. And it's going to end in Boston with a study of Mary Baker Eddy and Emma Curtis Hopkins at the Boston Christian Science Center. There's a flyer out there. If you want information, I think we would love to go to that. We may actually plan to do that. But there is a flyer out there. You can look up for more information on that. And there's also registration or an information Zoom call on August 20th. All the information's out there if you want to check it out.
Yes, a part of evolution, watching ourselves grow and expand. So it's a little lengthy, but I want to take the time to share Ernest Holmes' definition of the word evolution. Might be a little bit different than what David shared or what we typically learn in school. Holmes writes, "The passing of spirit into form. All emerge from that one whose being is ever present and whose life, robed in numberless forms, is manifest throughout all creation. Creation is the logical result of the outpush of life into self-expression. It is the coming forth of spirit into manifestation. The unfoldment of first cause is what we call evolution. Since the idea is still in an unfolding state, it appears as though we live in an imperfect universe. Evolution is the time and process through which an idea unfolds to a higher state of manifestation. And since ideas are divine realities, evolution will go on forever." I think that's a beautiful definition of it. And so returning to the idea of evolving for CSL, one of the reasons that we want to make sure you got this information about the tour early is because next year CSL is 100 years old. Still a baby, but 100 years, that's a long time. So this year, the United States celebrated 250 years, and next year CSL celebrates 100 years. They're calling it CSL Global Centennial Celebration throughout the whole year of 2027. It's going to be a convergence of 3 milestones in the evolution of Science of Mind. The first one, 100 years since the Institute of Religious Science was incorporated. The second one, 100 years since the Science of Mind magazine was first published. And the third, 100 years since Science of Mind textbook was published. And you know, because you've seen my textbook a lot, it gets a lot of use. So if you don't have one, you probably want one. 100 years old, still a baby, and yet filled with information to help us get life straightened out the way we want it to be so we live in joy. This teaching is a teaching that has guided generations, including each one of us, and as we carry it forward in the way that we live. Not only has our beautiful teaching been evolving over time into this magnificent 100-year celebration, which is exciting enough in itself, but we as a society have evolved. Now, sometimes, I know, we get stuck in the present moment of our challenges, or of feeling overwhelmed by whatever is going on in our lives, or things that are going on around us. But truly, as we take a look back, we can see not only the great advances we've made, but many reasons for gratitude for today and our evolving systems. I recently read a book called Isola, which was written by Allegra Goodman. It's a historical fiction with its roots in true history. And although it had some pretty gruesome parts in it, I really like books like that because it's historical, but it's realistic fiction. It has a lot of truth in it. It takes place from 1531 to 1544. And Isola, who was an heir to a fortune and enjoyed the wealth in her early childhood, finds herself impoverished, desolate, and at the mercy of her guardian. And for all purposes, let's be real here, her guardian basically owned her life, made her decisions, what she could do, what she couldn't do. And as I was reading in that evolution of time, some years later, I'm grateful. I'm grateful that I live in today where, because of those who played a part in the evolution of humankind, I have more rights. And we've come a long way. And the thing is, and we're going to return to Ernest Holmes' definition of evolution, because we don't want our thoughts to stay stuck in this. It happens, it occurs over time and process. And so whatever is going on for us today, we're in the time and the process of being human. But it's not going to look like that forever. And we get to play a role in that. Might we have further to go to create a world where that works for all people and where people live as equals? Absolutely. However, let's remember to be grateful for the evolving structure of our world and its people. Evolving takes place over time and process. Ernest Holmes wrote these words: stop trying, stop struggling, begin to be calm, to trust in the highest laws of life. Even though you do not see them, they are still there. So let's think for a moment about our own personal lives, where we each are in our life today. Are we struggling with parts of it? Or are we choosing to lean into the calm, to listen within ourselves to that intuition and those sacred memories? And then taking action as we're guided within. And absolutely trusting the universe to do its good work by means of us. What ideas do you hold in your mind for the process of evolving to make manifest in your world? In Science of Mind, we define the word ideas. What ideas are you holding in mind? We define those as mental concepts. Any object of the mind existing in apprehension, conception, or thought. Now, the ideas of God are the divine realizations of His being. The real ideas are eternal, and no two ideas are alike. The creative mind of the universe, being infinite, thinks of a limitless number of things, and each thing is therefore separate and distinct in the great whole. In the book, they say, just as the atoms of science are cemented together by the ether, so each idea of divine mind is united in one spirit. No two things are alike. No two people are alike. All come from one life. All are in one life and live by it, but each forever maintains its identity in the perfect whole. There is one life. I told you we would return for a few moments to the original definition of evolution, where Holmes writes, since the idea, and think now of your own ideas, not just of the global ideas, that too, but our own ideas to move our life. Since the idea is still in an unfolding state, it appears as though we live in an imperfect universe. We don't. Evolution is simply the time and process through which that idea unfolds to a higher state of manifestation. We are in that process. And since ideas are divine realities, evolution will go on forever. In our own lives, we can be inspired by this knowledge, by this wisdom of evolution, so that we can be the instrument of thought through which our ideas unfold into that higher state of manifestation, simply by the way that we choose to live, the way we choose to communicate and interact. There is not one thing going on in our lives which we do not have the power to see through its development and unfoldment into its greatest expression of good. So be the model. Live in a way that both motivates and inspires others, while living your life feeling as though you are taking flying lessons. Come fly with us. And so it is.